But the thing that really piqued my interest this morning was a discussion coming out of Jim Grant, who's one of my absolute favorite observers. I love Jim. He's the one who coined the phrase, I think, around government bonds, return-free risk.
In a recent discussion, finance expert Rick Rule delves into the alarming arithmetic behind government bonds, particularly the U.S. 10-year Treasury. He highlights the disparity between the nominal interest rate and the real impact of inflation on purchasing power. Rule critiques the Consumer Price Index, CPI, emphasizing its flaws and the omission of significant household expenses like taxes. His calculations suggest a staggering 7% decline in purchasing power, questioning the wisdom of investing in government bonds when the government is essentially eroding wealth. Rule urges awareness of this economic reality, especially for younger generations, calling it not just bad economics, but also immoral. Don't miss this insightful analysis on the hidden costs of seemingly safe investments. With that, let's dive into the video to hear his full thesis.
The interest rate that's paid is so far below the purchasing power, the diminishment of the purchasing power of the security, that the 10-year bond, as an example, ultimately is a way to take a portion of your purchasing power every year for 10 years. And so there was really a lot to learn this morning in the news. The important preamble to the arithmetic is that I don't, and I don't think you do, believe that the CPI is really a measure of inflation. Listen, first of all, it's hedonistically adjusted, right? Which means that a bunch of big thinkers tell you what your computer's actually worth, which is different than what you paid for it. And they tell you what your house is worth, which is different than what you paid for it. Then, of course, when it's inconvenient, they don't include food or fuel. Yeah. Yes. Anybody who looks at me knows I like to eat. So an index which doesn't cover food and fuel is, from my point of view, strange. But the strangest thing of all, to me, is that the CPI doesn't include tax. The largest household expense for most American working families is tax, greater than shelter, greater than food, greater than energy, and greater than transportation combined. So the idea that a measure of the purchasing power of the dollar doesn't include tax,
wow,
it's 40% of the household expense of so-called middle-class households. That's pretty crazy. So if you take that as a preamble, I did some probably inaccurate calculations about the deterioration of the purchasing power of my own savings against the basket of goods and services that I consume, mostly tax. And what I believe is that the purchasing power of my savings is declining at about 7% compounded, fully loaded. Jim Williams' Shadow Stats, of course, would come with a higher number, but I don't need to use a higher number to make the point. So let's get back to the arithmetic. The U.S. 10-year Treasury pays you, 4.3, I think, currently, in a currency where the purchasing power is declining at 7% compounded. That's pretty ugly math. What the government is saying is that they're going to take away 2.6% of your purchasing power a year for 10 years, a promise which I'm certain that they'll keep. But that sort of bothers me. I mean, it bothers me personally, but the truth is I've been lucky. I've worked hard. I don't have much to worry about in my life. It bothers me a lot more for younger people. It bothers me for people who don't at least understand the nature of what's happening to them. I think it's bad economics, but I also think it's immoral. And I love the chance that you give me to talk about it.
In this next discussion, Rick Rule sheds light on the disconnect between voter sentiment, narrative influence, and the intricate reality of inflation. He challenges the common misconceptions around inflation, pointing out the flawed Consumer Price Index, CPI, and how low interest rates, intended to combat inflation, ironically benefit the wealthy. Rick delves into the conundrum presented by Jim Grant regarding the natural interest rate and the potential consequences of a failed Treasury auction. Offering a unique perspective as a seasoned credit analyst, Rule urges viewers to consider these factors in their financial decisions. A must-watch for those navigating the complexities of inflation and market dynamics.
I think you're generous with the fractions. I think that the voters are very good at feeling.
Yeah.
And they respond to narratives well. And I don't think that they're so good at arithmetic. I think the voters are probably fairly bad about thinking. Now, they can be excused for this in the sense that it's much more fun, it's much easier to feel, and much more difficult to think. When the voters think about inflation, if they do think about inflation, first of all, they think about the CPI, which, as you suggest, is a lie.
Uh-huh.
The second thing about inflation is that, oddly, it benefits the rich more than anybody else. A period of low interest rates, like we went through, lower interest rates, which we went through for 40 years, and high, at least replacement cost inflation, benefited old, fat, bald, rich guys like me. I had access to credit. I had the education to understand how to apply the credit. I bought real assets, and my cost of capital was below what it would be in a normal set of circumstances. At the same time as the replacement value of the assets I bought, things like almond groves and apartment buildings increase. Ironically, these government programs, if you are clever enough to dodge them, worked out very well, but not in the way that either the politicians, I think, or the voters intended them. It's interesting to see now that Jim Grant suggests the conundrum that the natural interest rate, which is to say the interest rate which would attract private capital relative to the deterioration of the purchasing power of the dollar, is quite high. And there is some threat of a failed auction, treasury auction, which means that from his point of view, the probability is that the nominal or false interest rate stays higher for longer than other people believe. He also says that if that doesn't occur, if there is a Fed pivot, that it will have a profound impact on faith in the market, and perhaps an impact on market liquidity. I'm not saying this is going to happen. Jim Grant is better at stuff than me. I'm just a credit analyst, not an interest rate analyst. But it really, truly is an interesting conundrum. And I think it's something that all of your listeners need to take into account with their own actions, which is the reason why I was so eager to have this discussion today.
In today's eye-opening discussion with Rick Rule, we delved into the intricacies of inflation, dissecting the flaws in the Consumer Price Index, CPI, and the impact on purchasing power. Rick's insights on the declining value of savings, coupled with the looming challenges faced by younger generations, paint a compelling picture. We explored the conundrum presented by Jim Grant, offering a unique perspective on interest rates and their potential impact on market dynamics. If you found this conversation as enlightening as we did, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, like the video, and share your thoughts in the comments below.